Hello and welcome. Yeah, we are on week 13 of the U.S. State ZenQuiltz journey that I began for 2025. And for those of you that have joined me at any point on this journey, whether it be for 1 week or every single week, I appreciate you. I hope that you're having fun and enjoying the process of watching these blocks unfold one block at a time. And if you haven't taken the opportunity to lay your blocks out, your quilt blocks out all together yet, take the opportunity. It's quite amazing to see how far we've come. But anyway, here's a visual of your supplies for week 13, and we're headed to Oklahoma. So I'm going to go ahead and push these out of the way. And we're going to go ahead and get started in the same fashion that we always do, and that is by offering our 3/16 inch border around the tile. So this is just going to give it a uniformity. Nothing in our quilt blocks are the same except this frame. And this frame will border every single block that we offer this quilt and be, again, the only thing that is uniform in each expression. I did confirm last week, I thought that there was not a single tingle that was duplicated so far on this journey of 13 weeks. And I did confirm that. And in fact, this week we will not be duplicating either. So hopefully, maybe not only will we have 50 state quilt blocks, but we'll have many potential new tingles that we've learned along the way. Yeah. So now that we have that frame identified and defined, we're going to go ahead and only work within that center space. And we're going to lay a little hash mark at every space right after our 3/4 inch. So that's every 12 and a half lines, we're going to lay a hash mark. And we're not going to count that half that's left over as our half. We're going to start 1, 2, 3, right? So the next line is going to start 1, and we're going to go to the space at the 12 and a half. So every 12 and a half inch or 12 and a half lines on our ruler, we're going to lay a hash mark. And that will divide our center into 4 equal sections-ish. Our final section will have an extra line, but it is okay, right? We're translating this the best that we can with someone that doesn't know math. Although I did ask Google how to do this appropriately. And then I proceeded to ask Google how to show me on a ruler. Every 12 and a half lines, so the space between the line 12 and 13, we're going to add a hash mark. And then we're going to connect those lines top to bottom to form columns. Keeping those column lines between our frames. So once we have those columns, we're going to take those columns and turn them into rows. And once again, we're going to add a little hash mark at the space between lines 12 and 13. I know setting up our quilt blocks is not very Zentangle or, quite frankly, Zen-like. Unfortunately, using the 3.5-inch tiles, we don't have room to cut paper to form these individual pieces of fabric. So by doing the measuring, we're able to get the pieces of our material, um, still dividing those pieces up to then be sewn with our pen stitching to create that beautiful paper quilt expression. So once we get all strung up, it's a much better mindful process, but I do respect that this is not very Zen-like. So now that we're all strung up, I was a little heavy-handed this week, so I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and I'm just going to go ahead and dab some of this dark pencil or graphite up so that doesn't shine through my color too much. And again, I don't want to erase this. Obviously, we took the time to do it for a reason. I'm just toning back those lines so they don't have so much of a voice in this process. So now that we have those boxes defined, we're going to set up just a couple diagonal lines. So we're going to be focusing on our boxes right above or right aside of our top left and right above our bottom right box. And we're going to add a diagonal inside of those two boxes. Now, because we know that these are not purely perfect measurements, we're going to probably have to move our ruler into those specific boxes instead of drawing our line all the way through. But here's our vision. Here's what we're headed for, right? So second box from the left, top box or second box from the bottom right, adding those diagonal lines into those boxes. And then the second box from the top left and the second from the bottom right. Adding those diagonal lines into just those 4 boxes. And again, I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and clean that up so that we can add our color without having too much of a graphite interruption in that vision. Okay, so I'm going to go to my blender and I'm going to start first with all of my neutral color. Once again, this week we were asked to have a white material. Well, I'm just not having that. So our white for this whole series has been this neutral 991. So I'm going to go ahead and lay my palette down onto my slick, unporous surface. It's just a dollar store little palette board. And I'm going to begin laying all of my neutrals. Now follow along with me because we're going to be skipping all over this board, but I want to lay my yellow down first so that my other colors don't bleed into my yellow. So the first place I'm going to offer yellow is the top triangle in that second box. So I have my palette of yellow onto my blender, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill that triangle on the top of that second box. And if you're new to this process and you've not joined us before, as I go through this process, I'm going to use my blender. I'm going to do the third box on that top row as well. I'm going to use my blender to pick up ink or marker on that palette that I have off to the side. And as I lay it into these boxes, I'm not going to concern myself with whether or not this is a smooth palette, or I'm sorry, a smooth texture inside of these boxes. As a matter of fact, I want them to be kind of uneven and textured by default of how I'm laying that color down. So I'm going to go to the last box in that second row on the right. So that last box on the right in the second row, also getting this neutral palette. Again, I'm laying this down in a circular motion. So I'm able to kind of spread this ink out, grabbing that texture. All right. So now I'm going to skip one box and I'm going to go to the second box from the left on the second row. Circular motion, allowing some spots to have more saturated color and then other spots to almost be transparent. And you can always add more, right? Very difficult to take away if you feel like it got too dark. If you want to go directly to your tile with your marker, that's always an option too. And then I'm going to do the bottom triangle in that first box on the second row. Again, that whole box right below in the third row. So whatever medium you're using, allow it to work for you. If you're using colored pencil, I might suggest starting with your inking of your tangles before you add your color, so you're not battling that waxy surface. And you're going to skip a box and you're going to go to that third box in the second row. A couple weeks ago, we added our palette directly to the tile and then took our blender and blended that out. So many options, even using the same medium. So many options. Use what works for you and your vision, right? Don't get caught up in the what should I be doing? Listen to that creative voice and do what you want to do. Inspired by me, created by you. So we're in Oklahoma this week, and Oklahoma is the Sooner State. Anybody know what a Sooner is? I didn't, but now I do. So, and we're going to go to the bottom triangle right aside of that box as well. So the land rush of 1889 allowed people, settlers, to claim the unassigned lands. So any land that wasn't claimed was able to be claimed in what's now present day Oklahoma. But there was an official time start to that order, I'll say, and some settlers tried to go against the order and settle earlier. So it officially opened on April 22nd, 1889 at noon, but there were settlers that showed up early to claim the land, and they were called the Sooners. So Oklahoma got their nickname in 1889. It still holds today. And yet, I'm sure if you ask the majority of people in Oklahoma what it means to be a Sooner, they have no idea. Maybe I'm wrong, but who knows? Anyway, there it is. I am going to my 098 and my 126, those two shades of green for the next set of blocks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these palettes down side by side, that lighter one and that slightly darker one, and I'm going to blend these together with my blender, making sure that my blender's clean before I move on. And again, follow along because it matters where we place the second material as well. So I'm going to go to that top left block for my first green square. Again, just allowing these two colors to blend together, some lighter spaces, some darker spaces, however it falls. Again, creating that great texture. All right. So now I want to go to the triangle right below that box. So the triangle on top of the yellow triangle that already exists. Always add more depth into those colors as you go through the process. We're going to go to this open square in the second row. So when I say where we're headed with this material color, I'm using this week being inspired by the Workbasket U.S. 50 States block book. So Workbasket book. So, you know, to this point, I haven't even shared what this book looks like. So let me just go ahead and offer you, here's the visual, my inspiration, one of my inspirations, this Classic Collection U.S. State Quilts Blocks by the staff of Workbasket Magazine. Yeah. So here is the quilt or block that we're doing today. That's my inspiration. That's where I'm getting the details of each block. So this Road to Oklahoma block that we're working on right now is 100% inspired by the details of that book. Okay, so we're going to go to that white box down below. So it tells me in the write-up of this quilt how many different materials I should be using. Most of the time, it's 3 different materials. Tells me what materials I should be using in this process. And skipping there. And so on the bottom row, we're doing the triangle on top of that yellow triangle and the bottom right box. And tells me, of course, how to piece them together. Now, if I was doing a 12 by 12 actual piece of paper, this whole thing would be a whole lot easier because I could take the patterns directly from this book and incorporate them into paper. Not a big deal. What is a big deal and what has been uber time consuming in this process is taking the 12 by 12 measurements and layout for these patterns and making them, turning them into a 3.5 by 3.5 inch tile breakdown with someone that doesn't know math. So it's been quite a challenge to get the grids and the patterns put together, but here I am, still enjoying the journey, still sharing with you, and hoping that I am still inspired every week to do just that. All right, so I'm headed to that 847, 856, and I'm going to once again, same as I did with my greens, add a palette of both colors side by side. And blend the two of those together in the remaining spaces that we have. So clean off that blender, get rid of all of that green, and we're going to mix those colors together and head right into all of the open spaces that we still have left and add this beautiful red color. So Oklahoma has a state color. I'm not sure if any other state did have a state color. If they did, I didn't notice. But the state colors of Oklahoma are green and white. Well, green is represented, white is that neutral, um, kind of sandy yellow color that I've chosen to incorporate as my white neutrals into all of these expressions. Um, White just isn't really my thing. So I thought if we just added a neutral color, all would be well, and we could make all of that work, tie those blocks together with that. And as with every other week, we're trying to limit our palette to colors that we can incorporate and blend into each block somehow, some way. So although each block is different, we still have some kind of commonality tying all of the expressions together so that when we get done, there's a cohesiveness to that vision. Embracing the texture that's happening as we blend these colors together. Adding more into spaces as you see it. All right, so we have to do our border now, and I'm going to choose to do that 847 into my corners. So adding that dark, deep red directly to the tile into the corners. And then I'm going to take that darker green, that 098, to directly to the tile and add that depth of green on that outer border. You can choose any colors that you want, of course, to represent this material that kind of frames that block together, right? As always, if at any point I ask you to do something and it just doesn't speak to you, by all means, listen to that creative voice and do exactly what it's asking you to do. If it doesn't work, creativity is part of exploration and seeing what does work, right? So don't get discouraged and move on to the next thing. If you think there's enough in it to explore, then by all means, explore. So fun to do just that, explore creativity. So since this is our material that we're creating, I'm going to go ahead and just make sure that those white deckled edges along the sides of our tile are inked in as well, so that we don't have any of that white showing when we piece our blocks together inevitably at the end, right? So we're going to start in those red blocks first. So the state tree of Oklahoma is the red bud. And although we don't have a tangle called red bud, we do have a tangle called buds. And so we've made our material red. So in honor of the red bud state tree of Oklahoma, we are going to add the tangle bud. Now, I'm going to add one large bud into each one of these pieces of fabric. You can go ahead and do tiny buds and, allow them to kind of float in the space. However you see these red buds happening on your fabric is exactly what you should be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and eliminate the stem, which is kind of the first step out of this tangle. And I'm going to add a teardrop right in the center of my block. And in the center of that teardrop or flux shape, I'm going to go ahead and add 3 little seedlings on the center of that bud. And now I'm going to come out the bottom and arch up and add a curve or a go behind flux into that space. And then I'm going to do the same thing, tethering at exactly the same spot and adding another go behind flux that kind of diminishes in size or height as you go down. And whatever I did on the left side, I'm going to mirror and I'm going to do on the right side. So tethering that line, arching up, tucking it into that teardrop or flux shape. And again, same thing down below, diminishing that petal in size. And now I'm going to kind of do a floppy flux shape right at the base where all of those petals come together on the left and the right. So there's my buds that's representing the red bud state tree of Oklahoma. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing in this bottom box down here. So I'm going to start with my flux right in the center-ish of that box. Coming out of the bottom, I'm going to arch up and tuck another flux in behind. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing, only this time I'm going to diminish that size of the next petal. I'm going to mirror and do that same thing on the right side. And then I'm going to add a flux that flops to the left and a flux that flops to the right. On the inside of this original flux shape or teardrop shape, I'm just going to go ahead and add 3 kind of little seedlings or fescue shapes into that space. So we have these triangles, we have choices. We can, depends on how we want to cut the material. We can cut the material so that we only see half of our bud, or we can cut the material so that we fit that bud directly into our triangle shape. And that's what I'm going to choose to do. So I'm going to go ahead and add my beginning flux shape right into the peak of that triangle. But I'm going to rest that flux right on the sew line, so I'm not going to have those 2 fluxes that kind of fall off to both the left and a right down below. All right, so I'm going to arch up, tuck that flux behind, diminish in size and add that next petal. And I'm going to do the same thing on the right, adding those fescues into the center of that original flux. Okay, so there we have our buds, our state tree, our red buds represented. And interestingly enough, the state flower for Oklahoma is mistletoe. So we have this beautiful tangle missile that we're going to allow to fall into these green spaces. So missile, and you can kind of flow this however you see it. You can do one stalk. You can, allow multiple stems to grow. This is your fabric. However you see this coming to life is absolutely beautifully perfect, right? All right. So I'm going to start kind of off center and I'm going to add a little stem. And on this top of that stem, I'm going to add a little closure. Now that I have that stem and that closure, I'm going to go ahead and arch out to the left. I'm going to aura that and come up the center. I'm going to aura that and arch off to the right. And then I'm going to aura that. So we have this almost three-pronged stem that's now forming with this division, right? A couple things that we can choose to do. And don't put too much thought into this, just allow yourself to flow. We can add some berries to the end of that stalk. We can grow another stalk. That could be another 3-section or 2-section, right? So just adding another V shape or W shape, however many more stalks you want to add. Or we could close it off and add a flux to the right and a flux to the left with just a little detail of ink in between to close off that section and add the little mistletoe leaves. Okay. So we're going to play with this and we can add again as many sections to this as we see growing into this space, knowing that we're cutting this material off and allowing wherever those scissors fall or rotary cutter or whatever you're using to define what we see of the fabric that we're creating, right? So there's my first expression of mizzle. And there's still a lot of white space to me. So I'm going to try to balance this fabric out by adding yet another expression that I'll then divide. And you can divide it as many times or not at all as you want. Right? Could even have that material cut right where an extension comes out, right? Filling that space however you see it with muzzle, remembering that you're holding your tile with that red box in the bottom left and top right. Have fun with this. Enjoy the process and the repetition. Again, trying not to put too much thought into where your pen is falling. Just allow your pen to fall and go. That breath, change that perspective, pull your eyes away so that you can get the whole vision of where you are. Drop those shoulders down away from your ears, yeah? And breathe. So our final boxes are going to be representing the Broken Arrow um, popular tourist destination in Oklahoma, yeah, with the zoo, the museum, and just overall general, I understand, fun place to be. So we're going to add our arrowheads into those spaces. I'm going to choose to do the step outs inside of a box instead of a triangle, just so we can see how these kind of break down. All right. And we're going to take a box and we're going to divide it. You could divide it as many times as you want, but I'm going to offer 3 channels to that box. So I'm going to add 2 lines. And now that I have these 2 lines dividing this space, I'm going to start with this second row right where it meets that line, and I'm going to add a diagonal line. And then I'm going to come to the top row on the right side, and I'm going to add a diagonal line that parallels the line I already have. So first line starts at the second line where it meets at the box, and the second line starts at the top line where it meets the box. And you're going to parallel those lines. And then I'm going to create a box using the tips of those lines. And now that I have that box, I'm going to draw a diagonal line in this center that extends out. So where these crossovers happen in the inside of the line, I'm going to, so in essence, parallel a line, diagonal line with the box lines that I've just created, going through the tips or the points where those lines connect on the horizontal lines. Okay, which gives us triangles, right? So let me do that again. I'm going to first lay my horizontal lines. I'm going to start at that second horizontal line right where it meets the left side of the box, and I'm going to draw a diagonal line. And now that I have this diagonal line, I'm going to start at the top line on the right side where it connects to the edge of the box. And I'm going to follow this diagonal line in a parallel fashion to create another diagonal line. So the ends of both diagonal line, I'm going to connect from side to side, and I'm going to form a box. And now that I have that box created, I'm going to draw a diagonal line from crossover to crossover. So in this center of this box, where each of these lines cross over, I'm going to add a diagonal line that parallels those 2 diagonal lines and then extend them out the other side, creating triangles into that space. So I'm going to do that to all of my boxes first. So now that I have those boxes all defined, my triangles are there, it's great. We have choices. These triangular spaces, of course, are different pieces of material. Are you going to try to connect your lines across the way, or are you going to slightly offset them to make your quilt maybe a bit more human? It's totally up to you. It doesn't matter. It may be easier visually to see how these triangles come to play if we just, in fact, extend those lines across the way. All right. So a little bit more difficult to see because we're only seeing half of it, right? So we want to, here's our first line, follow that line through to connect to our second line down here, right? So we're still starting at the second line at where it meets our half or where it meets our divider. And if we look above, right here is where we want to be if we're matching up our fabric. Okay. Again, if we're following this through, somewhere over here, right here on this line, is our starting spot. So this line coming through to the other side of this box right here is, if this piece was a whole block, is where we would start. So we're going to use our go behind and follow this diagonal through and lay what we can see. We're going to connect our bottoms together. And by default, we already have our line through the center space. Okay. So now we're just going to do the same thing, following those lines through. Creating those triangles in just those half spaces that are left. And you know you did it wrong when you have a space like this. And that's okay. It'll all work out as always, in true Zentangle fashion. But this is our arrowhead. Now, in the actual step out, we would be inking in every other triangular space. But because we're making fabric, I don't want all of that gray ink. So what I'm going to choose to do is I'm going to ink in directly to my paper with that same 991 color to create the fabric. So once I have my first row indicated, I'm going to offset and do the opposite down below. So once you get one block completed, again, you have choices. You can follow through and make every one of these patches the same, or you can offset them, right? So totally up to you. I'm going to just, again, continue to follow through just to make it a bit more easy to follow. I don't have to retrain my brain each block, right? or each patch, I should say. So I'm just going to follow through, adding that 991 into that space, representing the ink or drama into this tangle. So there we have our arrowhead added to our mizzle and our red buds. So we're all tangled up. So we just need to take this fabric now and stitch it all together. So I'm going to grab that dark gray and I'm going to stitch each one of these blocks together, being mindful at how confusing these arrowhead blocks are going to become, right? So just mindfully, deliberately, intentionally, slowly, with that dark gray micron, just stitching each one of the seams of these patches. Without this stitching, it's merely just a bright, colorful Zia that we've created. It's this stitching detail that makes the Zen quilt come to life. that visual that we're going for those 50 states. Yeah. The slower, more deliberate you are with these little stitches, the less sloppy those stitches look, and the less tails that you get on the end of those stitches that make it look hurried and rushed. Don't forget to breathe. Loosen that grip on your pen. When we get to the stitching part, we grip that pen so tight, like it might get away from us. Yeah. Maybe drop those shoulders down away from your ears. You offer yourself a smile and release that tension in your cheeks. Once all those patches are stitched up, oh man, looks so cool. Once all those patches are stitched up, you want to go ahead and stitch that border as well. And again, if you're only here for 1 week or a handful of states, you may want to also be stitching your outside edge as well. You're not going to see me stitching that outside edge just yet because, again, I'm uncertain at this point how I'm going to finalize those quilts or these blocks and bring them all together. So now we're going to go ahead and add some depth into these patches where we've added that quilting layer on top. We're going to focus on those stitches and offer some shading or some depth right at those stitches so that the center of each patch kind of poofs um, right off the background or batting of that quilt. And you can see how that material kind of lifts up and puckers in the center of each patch. So I'm going to start with that 1098 and I'm going to offer a little bit of a deeper green into this pucker this week so that I'm honoring, I just feel like these are a bit more earthy tones, so I didn't want to offer the stitching in the brighter colors, but rather those more muted earthy tones, those deeper shadows. So each of those green mizzles, I'm gonna just in a circular motion go right around that stitching, and you'll see those stitching kind of fall to the background and that center just lifts right off your tile. Again, just showing the poof of that material as it would if we had needle and thread in our hand instead of a pen doing that stitching. Just a subtle little difference. Again, that circular motion to define each one of those spaces. I'm going to go to my 924 and do the same thing into those red spaces. So this quilt title, or quilt block title, I guess I should say, is The Road to Oklahoma. That's what it's called. Each block so unique and colorful, yet when they're all put together out on the table or just laying them out to see how far you've come, it is such a beautiful expression of this journey. So excited to get to actually putting them all together for real. 1034 is where I'm headed into that neutral space. And again, I've chosen the darker shade into these stitches this week. So just be mindful. Don't allow this color to kind of take over so that you eliminate that textured, blended background, right? Just allowing those shadows to fall within the stitches. If you've been enjoying this journey, share with a friend. Let them know what you're doing on Sunday mornings. Yeah. Like, comment, share so that other people can find it that may not already know about it. Right. So there we have it. Week 13, Oklahoma. Thank you ever so much for joining me on this journey. Offer yourself gratitude and appreciation for giving yourself this creative time, and offer your chop, your signature, however you own your masterpieces. And until next time, thank you so much.